Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday, April 19th, day 3 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I've been watching some of the Islanders Hurricanes game tonight. Was also flipping back and forth between the Bruins and Panthers. But for today's episode, we're going to get into my 3 main reasons why this season did not go as planned. The first of which you will get right after this drop.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at Elemental Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So let's jump right into it. So for today's episode, we're going to get into my 3 main reasons why this season just went down the drain. The Penguins missed the playoffs for the first time since 2006. My first one, honestly, it's just the lack of consistency. I think that's really the big one for me. To start the season 4-0-1 after that great start, should have been 5-0 to be honest. That overtime loss was to a Canadiens team that the Penguins were up 2-0 going into the third period. They allowed an early goal in the third, and then they actually allowed that 6-on-5 goal. With less than 2 minutes to go in the third. They tie it. Montreal ties it, and then they win it in overtime on a power play goal from Kirby Dach. Penguins easily could have been 5-0 right there, but after that, they have that massive 6-7 game losing streak. And then November and December, they just rip through the league. And I mean rip through the league. Going into the new year, this team had 65, 70% chance of making the playoffs. The odds were very much in their favor. They were very much in a playoff spot. I'm pretty sure in terms of being up on the Panthers, they were about 7 to 8 to 9 points up on them. But, they would have these streaks, again, that 4-0-1. And then you had that 6-7 game losing streak, and then they win 13 out of 16, whatever it was in November, December, where they are tearing through the league. And then they went on another big losing streak. Then they went on a little bit of a winning streak. Then they lost a few games. Then they won. And it was just, I was saying it all year, Jekyll and Hyde. And, they threw away games that they just should not have lost. And I don't need to remind everyone that they only won 1 game combined against the Senators, Canadiens, and the Red Wings. And I'll even throw the Chicago Blackhawks in there. 1 game combined against those 4 teams. A good chunk of those teams are lottery teams. That's not good enough. And even in the games that they would play well, and you'd be like, oh my God, like it looks like there's an actual good team here. And, we saw it for a lot of stretches this season, but then they would follow up those performances with games where it's like, what are we watching here? It almost just feels like they would pick and choose. They would go through the schedule, right? And it's like, oh, we're going to show up for this select game. Then we're not going to show up for this game. Then we're going to show up for this game, not this game, this game, this game, this game, not. That's almost what it felt like, to me at least. It literally felt like they would just look at the schedule, decide, oh, we're going to play hard against these teams, and we're not going to play hard against these teams. For example, those first 2 games against the New York Rangers this past season, they played their tails off against them. Sure, they lost the next 2 games at Madison Square Garden, even though the third one they could have gotten a result from, but at least they played hard against the Rangers at home. But yet you can't do that against the Senators or the Canadiens, and especially the Blackhawks at the late stage of the season where everything was on the line. Heck, we can even throw that loss to the San Jose Sharks in there. They only won 1 of their games against them. They lost the game at home, and that was right before the All-Star break earlier this year. There was just way too much inconsistency from the team. This was probably, I think, the most inconsistent team, Penguins team, obviously I should say, that I've watched in my lifetime, maybe outside of the 2014-15 season, but I also don't think that team was that good. And I know this team wasn't that good either, but in terms of, inconsistency, I think this one has it in the bag. I don't get it. And you can even throw the games against the Lightning and the Avalanche in there. The Penguins win a combined 5-0 against those two teams. I'm not joking. You all know it too. 5-0. They swept the season series against the Lightning, and they usually play well against the Lightning. They beat the Avalanche both times after losing to the Avalanche both times last year. But you're telling me you lose to the Blackhawks and you lose to the Sharks and you lose to the Canadiens and you lose to all these bad teams, and honestly just felt like they weren't taking those teams as seriously. And I understand, you get up more for games against teams ahead of you in the standings, against better teams overall. I get that. But you still have to give the teams below you, or the teams even right around you, like the Islanders, that same level of respect that you give those teams above you in the standings. And those Islanders games, what killers those were, right? Massive, massive killers. I will continue to argue that they should have won those last 3 games against the Islanders. They should have gotten all 2 of those. They should have gotten to all 3 of those games in regulation. That they got blown out in the first one. Okay, whatever. But the second one, you're up 4-2 with less than a minute to go in the second period. You don't win that game. You're up 2-1 going into the third period. In the next game at home, you allow 2 goals in only a few minutes, and you don't tie the game late in regulation when you're throwing, a bench at Ilya Sorokin. And then the last one, the worst one, up 3-1 with less than 6 minutes to go in the third period. You're actually playing a pretty solid game, and then all hell breaks loose, and then you lose in overtime and you only get a point. They only got 1 point in those 4 games against the Islanders. Those were killers right there. And I don't really think that was, they give it inconsistencies. I think that just had to do with them not being able to defend in the third period. And I think that is a big issue. It obviously was. It's not going to make my top 3, though it probably should. But that's another one right there. But still, the lack of consistency with this team was baffling this season. It's a season unlike any other I've ever seen. The streaks that they would go on. Win 4 your first 5, lose your next 6. You win 12 your next 15, whatever that number was. You lose your next 6 or 7 in a row. You win your next 4 in a row, but you lose your next 4. Happened all season. They couldn't even string together a 4-game winning streak with everything on the line, and most of those games were against garbage teams. That should tell you all you need to know about this team and its lack of consistency this season. Not good enough, and that's why they're sitting out right now. So I think that's chief among. I think that's the top reason why this team, they weren't able to, make the playoffs and be a better team this season. They just were never consistent, even with the flaws on the roster. They could just never get out of their own way with a lot of these games. That wraps up this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, I am going to get into my second reason for why this season just did not go as planned for the Penguins. But before we get into that, we do have to discuss game time. So, there have been plenty of times where I've been stressed about buying tickets. Actually, just last week against the Blackhawks, where some of those tickets were going pretty fast. It was kind of like a playoff atmosphere, but, I was able to get them at the last minute thanks to Game Time. It is the place for last minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. You also can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section, rows or less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You can download the Game Time app right now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, you can create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, I'm back in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at @Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. So, my second reason for why the season did not go as planned, the lack of depth scoring / finishing. I believe it's John Smith and a couple others on the YouTube channel who have been saying this. The Penguins and excuse me, the numbers back this up. They have been one of the worst finishing teams in the league these last couple of seasons. They were dead last season. You figured that it was going to regress to the mean because the season before last season, the COVID shortened year, the Penguins, they were the best finishing team in the league. I'm not joking. Look it up. They go from first to worst. You figure it would at least get up to the middle of the pack this year, right? Nope. They stayed basically dead last. I believe they got 31st in the league. Yeah, I know. Yeah, where's my notes? Yeah, 31st. Not good enough at all. And, part of that is due, I should say a good chunk of that is due to not having enough pure finishers on this team. The Penguins need more of those for next season and beyond if they want to win again in the Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang era. All we need to do is look at the stats. This season, Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby had 33 goals. Evgeny Malkin, 27. Jake Guentzel, 36. Rickard Rakell, 28. Jason Zucker, 27. Brian Rust, 20. The entire top six had 20 or more goals. Chris Letang also had double-digit goals. He finished the season with 41 points. The only player that had double-digit goals in the bottom six this season, outside of Bronk McGinn, who was traded, he had 10 goals, 16 points in 60 games for the Penguins. I'm not really counting him right now because he's not on the team. The only player that is currently on the team that had more than 10 goals in the bottom six outside of the top six and Chris Letang was Jeff freaking Carter. He had 13 goals and 29 points in 79 games. That is sad. I mean, that's a far cry from last season when Denton Heinen had 18. Evan Rodriguez had 20, basically, right around there. Jeff Carter had double digits last year too when he was actually showing a little bit of a pulse. Man, I mean, Teddy Bluger actually scored a little bit last year. Man, it is a far cry. Man, just think of those bottom sixes these last couple of years. You had Evan Rodriguez, Danton Heinen at 18. Obviously, we saw some regression this year, which is unfortunate. Freddie Gaudreau was awesome. Jared McCann, I don't need to remind everyone how good he was in the bottom six. Brandon Tanev had double-digit goals when he was here. These last two teams were deep. They were very, very, very deep. And the Penguins were anything but that this season. Let's go. We can keep looking at the numbers here. Jeff Petrie, he only had 5 goals. I understand he's a defenseman, but he wasn't as advertised. Danton Heinen only had 8 goals and 22 points this season. Kapanen had 7 goals before he was waived. Ryan Poehling only had 7 goals. Josh Archibald only had 6 goals. I understand he was hurt for a good bit, but after the way he started, even when he came back, you figured, he can start scoring a little bit again. No. 6 goals for a fourth liner. That's not going to cut it. I'm sorry. I understand he was a bit banged up. That is still not going to cut it. Drew O'Connor, only 5 goals this season. Teddy Bluger, 2 goals. You go down the list, 2 goals, 3. Mikhail Granlund only had 1 goal. Slim pickings. That is a massive reason why this team did not go anywhere. And heck, you want to go to the blue line? Let's do it. Why not? Marcus Pettersson had a fantastic season. Not going to pick on him that much. Only had 1 goal. Brian Dumoulin, only 1 goal. Jeff Petrie, 5 goals. So from half of your starting defensive core, 7 goals from 3 guys. I am sorry. You need more offense from your back end if you want to go further as a team. You need more offense from your bottom 6. I mean, I've been saying that all season, but from your back end too, I understand. I don't want every defenseman being an offensive wizard, but 7 goals combined from half of your starting defensive core heading into the season is not good enough. P.O. Joseph, he had a few goals. I'll take that, even though his defensive lapses this season were kind of to say the least. But, Chad Riedel, 1 goal. Mark Friedman, 1 goal. Dmitry Kulikov, no goals. Jan Ruda, 3 goals. So if you combine Dumoulin, Pettersson, Petrie, and Jan Ruda, 10 goals combined from 4 of your 6 starting defensemen coming into this season. It's not good enough. And again, I'm not trying to pick on Marcus Pettersson because he was a beast for this team this year. Either way, you need more offense from that unit. And I think the new management group is going to realize that and is going to try to make some changes to it, somehow, some way. You can't be having Chris Letang only give you your offense from the back end. You need other players to help in that department. Yeah, did Brian Dumoulin set a career high in points? Sure. He only also had 1 goal. You need more of the other players outside of the top 6 scoring goals for you. Those numbers that I just gave you, those represent a failure by this last front office to build a competent team around star players. That's what it does for me. And it's ridiculous that that's what Sidney Crosby and the rest of that core group got, because they didn't deserve that. They did everything they could to try to get this team into the playoffs. But, poor roster construction, bad performances from players who you expected to have not that good performances. Some other players you expect to be better were not as good. And this is what you get. They need to fix the bottom 6 next season. They got to maybe change out the defense to get a couple more puck movers / point producers back there while also maintaining, some defensive defensemen. And I think if they do those things, they'll have a more well-balanced team for next season, even if Jason Zucker walks in. I know that's going to be hard replacing 27, 28 goals, but I think you can find someone on the free agent market or via the trade market that can hopefully come close. That if you only have to replace 1 top 6 winger for next season, I think you're doing pretty good, because sometimes a lot of teams, they have to replace more than 1 top 6 winger heading into a season. But that does it for this segment of the podcast. Coming up to end the show, we're going to get into my third and final reason why this season did not go as planned. Some of you will probably have a good guess for it. We'll have to see. Stick around after this for this commercial break. All right, I'm back in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter, @Penguins. And of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. So, my next biggest one, honestly, it's the goaltending. This team had very inconsistent goaltending all season long. And it's never good when your starter only plays 47 games and your backup plays 38. That is just way too many games. And Tristan Jarry, injured or not, he struggled. He allowed almost 3 goals above expected, 909 save percentage, 2.9 goals against average. Casey DeSmith saved 3 goals above expected, 905 save percentage, 3.17 goals against average. Jarry, his goals saved above expected per 60, minus 0.063 for DeSmith, 0.084. Even Dustin Tokarski had a better goal saved above expected in 4 games compared to Tristan Jarry. This team was never able to just get consistent goaltending from whoever it was. And yeah, I know DeSmith had to play a lot more this season. I get that. But, you still need to be a bit better as a backup when, the starter is hurt. I mean, I'm not expecting DeSmith to be Jesus Christ over here, or goaltending terms of Patrick Waugh or Dominic Hasek. But, 3.17 goals against average is not good. A 905 save percentage, that's hovering on league average. I would say it's a little bit below, but, that has to change for next season, especially if he is on this team. Tristan Jarry, we don't know if he's going to be on the team next season. I'm not really sure he has earned another contract. If he does get one, I expect it to be only a 1 to 2 year deal. And I think they're going to bring someone else in to pair with him, that has more experience, that has better numbers than DeSmith, because you can't run this tandem back. And in big moments when you need your goalies to make saves to help you out, even during defensive lapses, and I know there were plenty of them this season for the Penguins, Jarry or DeSmith couldn't do it. I'll keep saying it, the more DeSmith plays, the worse he is. If he had played, maybe 10 less games this season, did the Penguins get in the playoffs? Probably, because that means Tristan Jarry is healthy. He was blaming it a lot on the injuries after that game against Columbus. I also do not understand why the hell he was even suiting up for that game, to be honest with you. But, this team could not get the saves when they needed them. especially in big situations. That game against Chicago, for example, that first goal from Connor Murphy, I would like a save there from a number one goaltender. The Andreas Athanasiou goal, he's way out of his net. You need a save there to prevent going down 2 goals. Right when that happened, the game was basically over, to be honest with you. Even in using another example from Casey DeSmith, remember that game against the Red Wings? Brian Rust takes that penalty, 3:48 left. You got to at least get a point out of that game. He gives up, he gives up that really weak goal, short side to David Perron, 5-4. They lose in regulation. That's one, you definitely really want back. And it's moments like those. I could probably name a whole bunch more that also really contributed to this team missing the playoffs. And everyone knew this was, I don't know about everyone. I think most people knew that this was going to be an issue coming into this season because they had run the tandem, a couple seasons back to back. It didn't work, but the GM said, "Oh, no problem at all. Not going to do anything about it." Heck, you easily could have replaced DeSmith at that last year's trade deadline, but he had a couple good starts in a row, and Hextall's like, "Oh, he's fine. He's good." No, he's not. He played the same way this season, and the GM still didn't make a move at the deadline. And heck, everyone knew Tristan Jarry was hurt by the trade deadline, and Ron Hextall knew it. He still didn't make a trade for any other goalie. They failed epically when it came to that. And, in a perfect world, you get 2 new goalies for next season. More realistically, I think you're maybe looking at 1, whether it's DeSmith or Jarry leaving. I don't know if you can find a big market for DeSmith. Jarry obviously is a free agent, so he can walk if he wants. I think it'll be maybe a little more tricky to replace him, especially if you're looking at the free agent market. But there's I would look at Karel Vejmelka, from Arizona, if they're willing to move him. That is a player, he's had decent numbers there in Arizona. If I can just look up that here real quick. Making sure I spelled his name right. He had pretty okay numbers this season for the Oats. 50 games, 18-24-6 record. Only a 900 save percentage, 3.43 goals against average, but he was playing on a really bad Coyotes team. You compare those numbers to last season, kind of around the same. But if you put him in front of a better team and a better defensive structure, assuming that the new management makes some changes to it, make some changes to the roster, and Mike Sullivan maybe make some changes to his system, I think he could be a little bit of a better goalie than Jarry. That's someone I would be looking at if I were the Penguins, if I would want to replace Jarry. I understand he has worse numbers, but again, I also think that's partly due to him being on a worse team. We all saw it. Linus Ullmark, for example, he was putting up decent numbers on some bad Buffalo Sabres teams. He goes out this season as the best year of his career, and he's potentially in the front runner for the Vezina Trophy. So, yeah, just not enough big saves and high leverage moments, not enough good goaltending in general, and this was the 3rd season in a row that they decided to run this tandem back, and sure enough, it didn't work. And that's going to need to change heading into next season. But that would do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I really appreciate all of you listening and watching this one. Coming up for tomorrow's show, we're going to get into a few reasons for hope for next season and why I think this team can get back to being good and, I think be a playoff team next season, especially if new management knows what they are doing. So look for that on Thursday. Again, thank you all so much for listening and watching. I hope you all really enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts on what you think the 3 main reasons were for this team's demise. And I'll, comment. You can send me a DM and all that stuff. Really looking forward to that. So again, thank you all so much. I'll talk with you all on Thursday.